April 14, 1943, south of El Getter, Tunisia. The desert air shimmered like molten glass. Heat waves danced above the sand as the sun hammered down on a line of Shermans grinding their way across a barren ridge. Dust devils spun behind them, filling the air with a choking haze that clung to every seam of metal and cloth. Inside Sergeant Thomas Hale's M4 Sherman, call sign, Red Dog 2, the temperature felt like the inside of a furnace. Sweat streamed down from his helmet strap, stinging his eyes as he squinted through the gun sight. The tank's air smelled of oil, cordite, and burning paint. The V8 engine hulled somewhere behind him, straining in the heat. Temp gauges hittin' red again, Corporal Daniels, the driver, muttered, tapping the dial with a gloved finger. "We're cookin' her alive." "Ease her back," Hale said through the intercom. "We can't afford another blowout." But it was too late. The tank lurched, sputtered, and shuddered to a stop. The engine coughed once more, then died with a hollow, metallic sigh. Silence filled the interior, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery. They weren't the only ones. All along the formation, hatches opened as crews scrambled out of their tanks, wiping sweat and cursing the heat. Another desert offensive had turned into a mechanical nightmare. Engines were seizing, coolant was boiling, and transmissions were giving out. The North African sun had claimed yet another day's worth of hardware. But one tank, sitting a few rows behind, was still moving. Its engine roared steady, the treads grinding forward without a pause. The crew of Red Dog 4, a younger team led by Private First Class William Carter, a 21-year-old gunner from Ohio, had somehow kept their Sherman alive when everyone else's machines were dying in the sand. And it wasn't luck. Weeks earlier, Carter had taken it upon himself to fix the tank's cooling system, a patchwork of pipes, scrap tubing, and a pair of rerouted water canisters strapped to the engine deck. His crew had laughed at him for it. "Looks like something outta a farmer's workshop," their commander, Lieutenant Harris, had joked. But on this day, under this heat, the farmer's fix was the only thing keeping Red Dog 4 alive. Inside the tank, Carter wiped his brow, grinning as the temperature gauge stayed steady. The improvised tubing hissed softly, carrying heat away through his makeshift cooling loop. "Still think it's stupid, sir," he said into the intercom. Harris didn't answer for a moment. Outside, another Sherman clanked to a stop, its crew climbing out to wave for assistance. Then, finally, the lieutenant replied, his voice calm, but humbled. "Keep her running, Carter. Let's see how long your contraption can hold." It would hold. For 18 hours straight. And before that day was done, Red Dog 4 would become a legend of the desert. It had all started 2 weeks earlier, in the dust-choked maintenance yard outside Gafsa. The crew of Red Dog 4 stood in the scorching sun, watching mechanics crawl over the burned-out hull of yet another Sherman that had died in the heat. The problem wasn't enemy fire, it was the desert itself. Engines designed for Europe were choking on dust and melting under the North African sun. Radiators clogged, coolant boiled off, and once the engine overheated, it was done, seized solid like concrete. Private Carter crouched near their tank's rear deck, his coveralls stained with oil, his hands blackened from tinkering. Around him, laughter echoed. "Whatcha doin', farmer boy?" Private Lennox, the loader, grinned. "You makin' a still back there?" Carter didn't look up. "Trying to keep us from frying next time the temp hits 110. You like walkin' home, Lennox?" Lennox smirked. "What's that, scrap pipes and fuel line? You really think that's gonna cool a Sherman?" Carter tightened a bolt with his wrench and straightened up. "Not cool it, help it breathe." He'd scavenged parts from wrecked half-tracks and abandoned trucks, fashioning an external loop that rerouted coolant through 2 large canisters mounted behind the engine hatch. The setup looked ridiculous, hoses everywhere, secured with wire, clamps, and even a ration tin. But Carter believed it would help dissipate heat faster than the standard system, especially in open desert air. Lieutenant Harris had walked over at one point, hands on hips, watching the mess unfold. "Carter," he said with half a laugh, "that looks like something my granddad would have built to water his crops." "Maybe so, sir," Carter replied without missing a beat. "But it'll keep her from boiling." The lieutenant had shrugged, amused. "Fine. It's your funeral when she bursts into flames." But Carter wasn't guessing blindly. Back home in Ohio, before the war, he'd worked on farm tractors that ran nonstop in summer heat. He'd learned how to bleed heat off engines using external tanks and improvised circulation systems. He'd seen them work in 100-degree cornfields. Now, under a Tunisian sun even hotter than home, he was betting his life that the same trick would work on a Sherman. When he finished, the tank looked like it had grown metal veins. Pipes snaked out like arteries, patched and soldered by hand. The others called it Carter's contraption. It became a running joke around the platoon. "Don't stand too close," Lennox would say. "That thing might blow." Even Sergeant Hale from Red Dog 2 had chuckled. "That boy's trying to turn a tank into a washing machine." But when the next offensive came, a push through the heat of El Gedder Valley, the joke stopped. As the formation rolled out under a punishing sun, engines screamed and faltered one by one. Crews fanned their hatches, desperate for airflow. Mechanics couldn't keep up. Then there was Carter's Sherman, humming steady, engine running cooler than any other. When the first tank overheated, they radioed it in. When the fifth stalled, they started cursing. By the 10th, eyes turned to Red Dog 4. Still moving. Still fighting. Carter smirked inside his gunner's seat. Guess the farmer's fix ain't so stupid after all. As the desert campaign pressed on, the true test of Carter's invention was yet to come. The next mission would push his jury-rigged cooling system, and his crew, to the absolute limit, 18 hours of continuous movement under fire, with no rest, no shade, and no margin for failure. April 15, 1943, 0430 hours. The horizon over El Gedder Valley glowed a deep crimson as the sun crept up, turning the dunes into waves of fire. The Allied column was already on the move, an armored thrust meant to cut through Axis supply lines running west toward the Mareth line. The men of Red Dog 4 had slept maybe 2 hours, half-dressed in the dirt beside their Sherman. Dust coated their skin, their lips cracked from dehydration. The sound of engines warming up rolled through the camp like thunder. Inside the tank, Lieutenant Harris went through the checklist, his voice steady but tired. "Fuel topped." "Full," said Daniels, the driver, checking the gauges. "Ammo?" 80 rounds, sir," Lennox replied, slapping the turret's inner wall. "And I'm prayin' we don't need all of 'em." Carter, sitting at his gunner station, checked his makeshift cooling rig one last time. The twin canisters rattled as the engine came alive, and he listened to the gurgle of coolant surging through his patchwork pipes. The needle on the temperature gauge twitched, then leveled. He exhaled, satisfied. "Running smooth," he said. Harris nodded. "Let's hope she stays that way. We've got a long day ahead." By mid-morning, the desert was alive with chaos. The offensive had run straight into the German 10th Panzer Division. The horizon flashed with muzzle bursts, shells screamed overhead, and the air stank of burning oil. Tank after tank went down, not from direct hits, but from engine failure and the brutal heat. "Red Dog 1 is overheating," the radio crackled. "We're pulling back." Moments later, another voice, "Transmission's gone. We're dead in the sand." But Harris's voice cut through it all, "Keep it steady, Daniels. Carter, range that Panzer, 800 yards, right ridge." Carter sighted through the optics, adjusting elevation. "On target. Fire." The cannon roared. The recoil slammed through the hull. A plume of dust and smoke rose where the shell struck. "Hit!" Lennox shouted. "You nailed him." They pushed forward again, treads grinding, the tank shuddering from the heat. Outside, the desert wind was a blast furnace. Inside, it was worse. Sweat rolled off the men like rain. The air shimmered with vapor and dust, each breath like swallowing fire. But still the Sherman ran, the gauge never rising above the green. Hours turned into blur. At noon, the temperature outside hit 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Fuel drums exploded in the distance. Crews were abandoning tanks, engines locked solid from the heat. Mechanics scrambled through the sand, cursing, dragging hoses, dumping water that boiled before it hit the metal. And yet Red Dog 4 kept moving, firing, reversing, pushing forward again. By 1400 hours, Harris was running on pure adrenaline. His voice rasped from shouting over the roar of the engine. 18 tanks down. We're one of 5 still mobile. Daniels looked back through the periscope. Sir, they're falling apart out there. Then we keep going, Harris said. As long as Carter's farm trick holds, we keep going. Carter didn't smile this time. His face was streaked with sweat and soot, his hands blistered from gripping the gun controls. But when he looked at the steady gauge, he felt something between pride and disbelief. Every other tank around them was dying, melting down under the desert sun. His patchwork cooling system, the one they'd mocked, was the only reason Red Dog 4 still roared. Guess I'll take back every bad word I said about your plumbing, Carter, Lennox shouted, reloading another shell. Don't jinx it, Carter muttered. We've got a long way to go. That long way stretched into night. As darkness fell, tracer fire streaked across the dunes like comets. The offensive had bogged down into a slugging match. Harris's crew had been inside that tank for nearly 18 hours, without stopping, without shutting down, without rest. And still, the Sherman ran. The farmer's fix hadn't just saved their tank. It had kept them alive. April 15, 1943, 2,200 hours. The desert had turned black, broken only by the glow of fires scattered across the valley floor. Burned-out tanks lay like twisted skeletons, their steel still radiating heat from the day's inferno. Overhead, the stars shimmered through a haze of smoke and sand. Inside Red Dog 4, the world was a coffin of noise and exhaustion. The men hadn't eaten in over 12 hours. Every breath tasted like metal. The floor plates were hot enough to burn through boots, and the air was thick with the smell of diesel and cordite. Yet the engine, Carter's patched-up, overworked engine, kept humming like a heartbeat. 18 hours, Daniels muttered hoarsely, gripping the controls. You believe that, sir? 18 damn hours. Lieutenant Harris glanced at the gauge. The needle sat calmly in the middle, unwavering. I believe it, he said. Because I don't have a choice. He reached up and thumped Carter's shoulder. Whatever you built back there, it's keepin' us in the fight. Carter didn't answer right away. His face was pale, eyes red from the glare of the gun sight. He could barely focus through the fatigue. Still, he managed a faint grin. Guess I'll send the army my blueprints after this. Outside, tracer fire lanced across the dunes as the Germans launched a final counterattack. The crew could hear the high-pitched whine of panzer cannons slicing through the night. Sand burst against the Sherman's armor as near misses rained down. Panzer at 11 o'clock. Harris barked. Carter swung the turret, his muscles screaming in protest. He peered through the scope, spotted the faint gleam of enemy armor, and fired. The shell struck true. A flash. A roar. The panzer erupted in a storm of sparks and flame. Lennox whooped. He's done. That's number 6 today. But no one celebrated long. The radio crackled with static and panic. Red Dog 1 disabled. Red Dog 2 hit, we're pulling back. The Allied line was fracturing. Only a handful of tanks remained mobile, most too damaged or overheated to continue. "Orders, sir?" Daniels asked. Harris scanned the chaos through the commander's periscope. "We stay put. Cover the retreat. We're the only engine still breathing out here." And so they did. For hours, Red Dog 4 fought alone among the dunes, engine idling between bursts of cannon fire. Every round they fired drew return fire. Every hit they took rattled bolts loose. The desert around them glowed with burning wreckage. By 0300, the last Axis push had faltered. German armor withdrew under cover of darkness, leaving smoking ruins in their wake. When the firing finally stopped, Harris slumped against the turret wall, too tired to speak. Lennox leaned back beside him, staring blankly at the roof. Daniels shut down the engine for the first time in nearly an entire day. The tank exhaled a long metallic hiss, as if sighing in relief. Silence. Then Carter spoke softly, almost to himself. 18 hours. She didn't quit once. Outside, the night was eerily still. The desert wind carried the scent of burned fuel and scorched rubber. In the distance, the faint rumble of retreating German armor faded into nothing. Red Dog 4 sat alone, its hull scarred and dented, its improvised cooling rig still faintly steaming under the moonlight. It looked ugly. Ridiculous, even. But it had outlasted every other machine on that battlefield. At dawn, when the recovery crews arrived, they found Carter's tank still operational, idling quietly while others sat in ruin. Mechanics gathered around the rear deck, staring at the bizarre network of pipes and tanks. "What the hell is this?" one asked, running a hand over the welded canisters. "Gunner's invention," Harris said, stepping out of the turret. His uniform was soaked in sweat, his voice barely above a whisper. "Kept us alive." The mechanic shook his head in disbelief. "You're tellin' me this thing ran for 18 hours straight?" Harris looked back at the tank, then at Carter, who stood beside it, too tired to stand straight. "You're damn right it did." Word spread fast. Within days, the story of the farmer's cooling system made its way through the division. Mechanics began sketching diagrams, and officers requested reports. Soon, the Army was testing Carter's crude setup, refining it, adapting it for desert use. But for Carter and his crew, none of that mattered. They'd lived through hell, and their survival had proven one truth every soldier came to understand: sometimes, the smallest act of ingenuity could mean the difference between a burned-out husk and a legend that would roll forever. In the endless desert of North Africa, where engines melted and steel cracked under the sun, one Sherman tank had done the impossible: it never stopped running.